So next we're going to start to talk about forms. Forms are parts of HTML because they allow users to add their own data, basically. So we can have these forms where, and I'm sure we've all filled out like some type of login form or some type of registration form, and all that information is then submitted to a database or another server out in the world, and it stores our information. So every time we go to Facebook now, after we originally register, we get all our information back, and we're able to store data that way. So when we comment on Facebook, when we post something on our wall or submit an update, all of that stuff is a form. Although it doesn't always traditionally look like it, that's what it actually is. So let's talk about forms now. So I think I'm just gonna, besides this table, I'm gonna delete most of this other stuff because we don't need it anymore, and it was in our other file here. So we'll keep our table, and I'm gonna keep one heading that just says lecture 1 or something like that. And I know this is the second part, but again, we start counting at 0 in computer science. So this is part 2, but it's lecture 1 because we started at 0. And later on, you'll see why that's important once we start getting more into programming versus this more declarative language here that we're using with HTML. So here's what we have now over on the right. You see our table there. So underneath this table, I'm going to start to make a form. So let's just make a little space, put a comment that says form. And in form, we use a form element. And as you can see, that's has an opening tag and a closing tag. So we can put other elements and content inside of the form. One of the most common elements inside of a form is called an input. And inputs have, well, if you look here on the right, you already see an input. And let's put a couple breaks here just to add a little space. And I'm gonna click Alt-Shift down. So we'll just have 3 breaks in here just to move this away a little. I think it was a little too close. So later on, we're not gonna add all these breaks. We'll use CSS and design to alter how our pages look, and we won't be using HTML to do that. HTML is specifically to structure things, but right now, since that's what we know, that's what we're using. So in here you can see we have an input, and if I type into it, you can see what I'm typing here. So let's say Webdeversity. Inputs have important attributes that go along with them. One of them is type. So this is a type of input. Right now we're saying text. And then we have an ID, which is a unique identifier for that particular input. Here we'll put first name, and this is called camel case when after the first word we always capitalize any word after that. So if we had a dash here, this would be kebab case, and then we've already dealt with snake case where we have an underscore. So here I'm going to use camel case just to name this. And then we also have an attribute called name, and we'll put first name again. So even though this is a unique identifier, the name can be the same as the ID. Those things are 2 different attributes and work differently, and we'll show that in a minute. So here I'm gonna again create a break just to create a little space. Well, actually, let me put this without doing that first. So I can select this and then hit Control D or Command D and select the next one. And let's say last name here. So I selected both these fields and I'm changing them at the same time. I could also Alt-clicked anywhere I want a cursor. So you can see if I do that here, I'm changing all 3 of those at one time. So that's just alt clicking, and you can do that anywhere. So now we have a first name and a last name, and you can see they're together, and that's why I had added a break here just to get it on the next line, and I think I'm going to add another break just to give it a little bit of space again. So I'm going to copy this and paste it below as well. So now we have these two. So we need to label these, and that is called label, and that just adds a label, and then inside we put what we want. So here, maybe first name, and then you see that reflected over here. So we have to let the label know what input it's actually for, being used for, and that is called for attribute. So the value inside of this for attribute should be the same as the value of the input ID attribute. So we should here say first name. So this is the label for this input. And remember, this is a unique identifier, so this label belongs to this one particular input. So we either do it that way, or we can do it this way, where we say, again, I say label, and let's put last name. So either we need that for attribute, or we have to wrap the element with the label, or nest the input inside of the label would be the more proper way, I guess, to say that. So here, this, wrapping it with this label or nesting the input inside of this label is the same as putting this for attribute. It lets the browser know, or the interpreter, that this label is associated with this input. So those do the same thing, and you can do those either of these ways. I'd say the first way, or the second way actually, where you nest the input inside, is a little easier to remember than that the for attribute is associated with the ID. Because a lot of times, sometimes I can't remember myself whether the for attribute's associated with the name or it's the ID. But it is the ID. So that is, we created two text inputs here. There's also other kinds of inputs. So let's here add input, type, and here we're going to put password. And then again, we need an ID. We'll say password again. And by the way, when you see me typing and I say name, as soon as I see it pop up down here below, I know I can press enter or tab, and it's going to auto-complete this for me. So right now I'm going to press enter, and it puts me right in between the quotations where I want my value to go. So again, I can write that password out. And then I need to close this. So again, let's add a label. And here we're going to say password, and I am going to nest this inside. So I want to hit Alt up, and that moves it up a line and nest it inside of the label. And then lastly, create those breaks just so our next field. So here, the difference between these and the type, if we go over here back into our browser window on the right, and I start typing in here, you can't see any of that. So it looks like a password field. And it's all automatically formatted, and we just have to put in this type key value pair here. So type password. So with that, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to actually this time change this label, and I'll put email. And again, I can select this. So I double clicked it, and anywhere inside of the word you can double click and it selects the entire word. And then I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC, and I'm going to change all these at once, and I'm going to change them to email. So type email, ID email, name email. And here, later on for validation, well, first off, you can see like emails pop up. So it knows that this is an email field. But also later on when we validate it, it will make sure that that @ symbol is added and that it looks like an email address. That looks proper. So what I want to do here now is go out to Google, and my URL or address bar up here is actually Google's if I just type something in. And you can do that by going into settings and then setting your default like search engine to Google. And anything, you can just type it directly in your URL address bar up here and it will do that. Otherwise, you can obviously go to Google and then type it in to their search field input here. So here I'm just going to say input type HTML. And if we go here, you can see the input types. So button, checkbox, color, date, and we'll go over a few more of these. We're not going to go over all of them. Like the more common ones are probably password, radio, checkbox, email. So those are the more common ones, and text would probably be the most common. So down here we have those fields. I am now gonna just group this information together here. So let's even actually copy this down one more time because it often looks like this. So I selected it, Alt-Shift down, and here we'll put confirm. And then it's still type password, but here now I'm going to Alt-click in both of these fields, and I just want to say confirm password like that. All right, so we'll pretend this is a registration form, and so I want to kind of semantically now group these together. But in this case, it's actually a little more than semantic because it has a visual impact as well. So I'm going to put these in a field set. So you see the opening tag and the closing tag. I'm going to select all my labels here and Alt up. So now they're inside of the field set. So you see this border that it just created around that entire thing. And in here, a field set takes what's called a legend. And if I write something in here, let's say basic info. And now you see part of that legend, like this is its own section within this form. So one other thing before I even move on to some of the other elements is let's add a submit button in here. So under the field set, I'm just going to add an input again. And we'll say type and submit. That's the type it is. And we don't need like an ID and all that stuff on there. So when I hit submit, it reloads the page. It's probably going to happen so fast that maybe it will just flash. So when I hit submit here, we see that it went really fast. It kind of changed over. But what I want to draw your attention to is up here in the, well actually let's fill out the form first. So let's say John Doe, JDoe at abc.com, 123 for the password, 123 again. So now I'm going to submit it again. All right, and what I want to show here is that up here in the address bar, and let me zoom in a little more out here. If we look here, it says first name equals John. And I just accidentally erased that. It did look like this. So first name equals John, which is exactly what we had in our field. And then last name equals Doe. So this first name here is, look, it's camel cased, and it actually refers to that name property that we had. So name, first name equals John. So if I go back in here, and we can see all of them now, last name equals Doe, email equals J Doe, and this percentage 40 is actually what's used to it's interpreted as an @ symbol. So that's what that is, and that's why we don't use spaces, because spaces get something similar. I think it's like $20 would be a space. So let's find out quick. So let's actually put like Johnny May up here, like a first name that has a space in it, and then we'll put Dell, email, keep that the same, password 123, password 123. And now when we hit submit, we see Johnny plus May. Okay, so it's a plus, but it's not interpreted as just a space. So that's why we don't want spaces in our directories either, because it can create problems like adding this. So then we see our password 123 123. Okay, so our form is working, and let me just get back to our regular screen here. And if I look over here, name is what is associated with all that. So if I change the input type here to be first name 1 and last name 1, because these don't actually have to be the same. The ID and the name don't have to be the same. So if I do that, and now I submit the information again, 1 2 3. All right, and we look up here now, we see the 1 there. So that's how we know the name here attribute in our HTML is being used up here. And this, after this question mark here, that's what's called a query string. So this is the way information is passed to a file that processes it, or to a server or whatever. So where we send this to is determined based on another attribute in our form, and that is called an action. So let's just say we had Yahoo in here, and let's submit this form. It doesn't have any validation on it right now, so when we submit it, it takes me to Yahoo, because it's saying, oh, that's where this information here is going to be processed. So all the information the user just passed on. So typically this would look something a little more like mailer.php. So some back-end language that processes all this John and Doe and tells the database what to do with it, or basically says what to do with that information. So that's action. And then another one is called method. So sometimes we want to get information from the server, so that would be get. Other times we want to post information to the server, and that basically writes to a database usually when we say post. And sometimes you got to have particular permissions to post to something. So if I were to change this back to be Yahoo, and I tried to run a post, it would tell me, no, you can't do that. So let's just do it quick. So yahoo.com, and first I'll just do it like this. So I'm not going to even fill anything in. I'm just going to hit, well, I guess I'll just fill in John or something, and I'll hit submit. And I see it works just like it did before. But if I go in here and I change this to post, that means that I'm trying to write to their server, or I'm trying to write to their database, and they're going to be like, no, you can't do that. So here again, let's say John and hit submit. Oh well, I guess Yahoo works a little differently. It just basically went and got the page. Let's try to replace this with Google here. I know this one works. So let's go back to our page here, and I'm going to refresh. Again, I'm going to say John and then Doe and submit. And right here, the request method post is inappropriate for the URL. So we're not supposed to do that. Yahoo probably has something else written where if somebody just tries to randomly post, they just redirect you back to their home page or something. So that's why it didn't work with them. But so these two are usually needed when it involves a form. So again, this one is a kind of process. So again, usually it's something like mailer.php, and then what type of method do we want? Are we trying to get information from the server or get something from the server, or are we trying to post something to the server? And there's also a couple other methods as well that involve updating and deleting and whatnot. And usually those are kind of specialized, and you have to do some stuff on the back end, which is out of the scope of what we're going to cover. All right, so that is submit. This also works if we just have a button here. A button will, if we have a button in a form, it will submit by default. So even if I say John Doe here, and let's fill this out again, just so we know here, and I hit submit, we'll just look up here and oh, I didn't refresh. So let me refresh. So John Doe 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. I hit submit, and it says cannot get mailer because that file doesn't exist. But if you look here, the button did the exact same thing, where it actually the query string still exists. Like you still see Doe in the email and the password and all that. So all that stuff didn't change. And let's get rid of these ones now that we've shown that the name is associated with these fields up here. And let's make some other fields. So actually here I'm going to put this, which is kind of called a dead link. So it doesn't actually go anywhere, it just reloads the initial page. So now if I hit submit, oh, and I gotta refresh the page. So if I hit submit now, it doesn't go anywhere, it just stays here. Okay, so action. Let's write a comment. So action defines what action or with the query string. So action defines what to do with the query string, and then I'll just say user info. Kind of the same thing. And then we'll say method defines whether to retrieve information, so that would be get is retrieving, or write, which is the same as post. Okay, so now we have those kind of comments here that just tell us what action do and method do. And maybe even here we could put a comment that just says name is with user inputs in the query string. And then up here, I'm just going to put another a comment. So this is something that why I'm putting so many comments is so later on, you know, if this is something you go through and you're kind of typing along, or you try it for yourself afterwards, it's something that you can go back and reference later. So like for attribute is associated with the, I'm going to say input, or because sometimes it's not always an input element, as you're going to see after we get done with this here.